I want to thank everybody for coming today. We really look forward to hearing Louie's talk. And with that, I will turn this over to Dr. Ed Jolie, who will be introducing our speaker today.
Thank you, Diane. I'm Edward Jolie. I am a new faculty member here in the Arizona State Museum, the Claire Lee Tanner Associate Curator of Ethnology and Associate Professor in the School of Anthropology. I'm really thrilled to introduce you to Louie Garcia if you're not already familiar with his work. I've had the pleasure of knowing Louie for a few years now and certainly benefited from the conversations we've had. And so what I'll do is offer a little bit of sort of background to Louie and his work, and then hand it over to Louie to talk to us a little bit about these connections between Mesoamerican and Southwestern Pueblo weaving traditions. So academically, as we often start with these introductions, Louie has a BA in biology and Spanish, so dual degrees from the University of New Mexico, and a master's degree in language literacy and sociocultural education from UNM. And currently he works at Ernie Pyle Middle School in Albuquerque. More pertinent to the subject matter at hand is that Louie is the founder and president of the New Mexico Pueblo Fiber Arts Guild. And he's co-curated exhibits, received grant funding, held residencies, and done master artist workshops for a number of institutions, including the Pueblo Indian Cultural Center, the School for Advanced Research, the Heard Museum, and the National Museum of the American Indian. A teacher and a weaver, often at the same time, Louie Garcia is a Tiwa Piro tribal member who speaks English, Spanish, Tiwa Piro, and some Nahuatl. Now, this is a language skill, a tendency toward multilingualism that I remain deeply envious of, in part because I think it contributes so much to understanding and being aware of the thought worlds and perspectives that are linked with the acts of spinning and weaving that are integral to day-to-day life for so many people today. And no doubt, I think this combined perspective that Louie brings to his work, his linguistic skills and understanding, his interest in education and traditional technologies serve him well in his extensive travels throughout Mexico and Guatemala as he works to document persistent, in some cases, sadly vanishing fabric structures. Similarly, these skills and experiences have continued to enhance his contributions within the realm of museums and academia. Since 2011, Louie has been a key team member of the Cedar Mesa Perishables Project, which was initiated by Lori Webster. This project was set up to document more than 4,000 ancient perishable organic artifacts that were excavated from alcoves and rock shelters throughout southeastern Utah and adjacent regions since the late 19th century. The team's overarching goal has been to survey, photograph, and interpret these collections and make them more widely known to archaeologists, descendant communities, and the general public for research and educational issues. And he's been doing this work for a number of years now, obviously with not only Lori Webster, Dr. Lori Webster, but Christopher Lewis, who is a weaver, basket maker from Zuni, Chuck LaRue, Aaron Garrity, and most recently, Mary Wayaki, who's been bringing her skills to bear on some of these questions. So for followers of Louie's work and scholarship, you can find Louie on Facebook and on Instagram. Today, however, we are fortunate to have Louie here to speak with us about his work with Mesoamerican traditions and the connections he sees with the venerable Pueblo and weaving traditions of the U.S. Southwest. So it is with great pleasure and excitement, I now turn things over to Louie. Louie, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and expertise with us today.
Well, thank you, Ed, for that very thorough introduction. I would like to greet everyone in my native Piro language. Kinumamtima, manuso waiwonae, turshan elam hiae, nauna atsikem kwee iketei. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Louie Garcia. My Indian name is Turshan, which means sunrise in the Tiwa language. And I was asked to share a little bit about my work, and I jumped on the opportunity because oftentimes I am asked to present on Pueblo weaving, which I am a Pueblo weaver and very passionate about that topic. But I also spend a great deal of time and effort researching and traveling throughout Mexico and Mesoamerica to network and study with the weavers of that area. So the topic of today is connections between Mesoamerican and Southwest Pueblo weaving traditions. And this has been a topic that I'm very passionate about because it essentially is my life, my background. My wife is a native Nahua from the state of Morelos in Mexico, just southeast of current day Mexico City. We have two girls, 11 and 15 years of age, and we're raising them multilingually. As a bilingual educator, that's my day job. We made a choice very on as we started to have a family, to raise our girls, or to raise our children with our native languages. And in our home, we actually do not, one of our rules is no English in the house, in the household. And while we're at home, we're speaking in Spanish or one of our two indigenous languages of Nahuatl and Tiwa and or Piro. And outside of the home, of course, English is okay for them. So our girls know that, and that is a very important part of maintaining our indigenous identity and languages and cultures. So to start out, I just like to give kind of a background in terms of Pueblo culture and looking at what are the things that are important to us as Pueblo people. Well, at the center of Pueblo life is the corn. Corn or maize is kind of the staff of life that is at the center of Pueblo life. And being an agricultural people from the desert Southwest, to raise a crop in the middle of the desert can be difficult, at least. So in order to be able to do that, our ancestors were instructed early on to maintain a spiritual way of life and to maintain a value of hard work. And we know that through prayer and ceremony that we would maintain a balance that our ancestors will return in the form of rain clouds to bring moisture to our fields, where we can raise a crop and in turn feed ourselves and our families. These often are carried out in the form of songs and dances that happen within the villages, many of which are open to the public and others of which are closed to the public. We're taught from early on to remain humble and to live in a simple way, with simple way of life that will sustain our prayers and our way of life in maintaining all of the balance in all aspects of Pueblo life. Through various practices of meditation and a focus on community, then we are able to bring blessings to the community and to the people. And so those are some of the tenets of some of our cultural beliefs. The prehistoric Pueblo weaving, we're talking about pre-1400. So again, we go back into the reaches of time, long before European contact. We know that through archaeological evidence that fibers such as yucca, which is of the Agavaceae family, rabbit fur, turkey feathers, human hair, cotton, and various decoration techniques such as resist dye, dot in the square motif, and the earlier design work, a lot of it is asymmetrical, as we see in this image from Pottery Mound. So some of the techniques that were used in the Pueblos include braiding and spraying techniques, looping techniques, which is kind of an earlier form of knitting, twining, weaving using warp and weft and a heddle, various plain and twill weave structures, tie-dye and fabric painting and brocade. And after European contact, we have knitting and crochet and embroidery with the introduction of metal needles that really opened up a whole other area that was not, there's not a lot of evidence, and there's a little bit of argument there about that between scholars as to whether embroidery existed prior to contact or not. So that's open to discussion at this point. So as was mentioned earlier, some of the work that I am involved with through the Cedar Mesa Perishables project and working with Dr. Lori Webster as a cultural consultant to the team, we have the opportunity to go to accompany Dr. Webster to these, to various institutions to go through the collections and document them. And so one of the things that really has helped me to gain a better understanding of my ancestral heritage and the techniques and materials that were used by my Pueblo ancestors has really opened up a whole other level of understanding and inspiration for me as a Pueblo fiber artist. And these are some examples of some of the material that we see, which include, hand spun cotton, yarn, various tools that were used, basketry techniques, and other loom implements. In this case, in the far left, we have a loom anchor, which is essentially a bundle of organic material. In this case, it's feather wrapped twine wrapped around some maybe sumac branch that has a loop. And this is a loom anchor that would be buried into the ground, and just the loop on the top sticking out that would serve to lash the bottom loom beam to the floor, and the top loom beam would be lashed to the ceiling beams in the kiva, or the structure that where the loom is being set up for weaving. So a lot of what we know about the ancestral Pueblo weaving, we are not so much from the actual textiles themselves, because they are organic, and many of them do not stand the test of time. Although there are several samples and fragments of those around, we get a more clear idea of the depth and breadth of these textiles from the kiva murals. And there are various sites in the Southwest, in New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, Colorado, that kind of give us a little bit of insight into what these textiles may have looked like back in that time. And so, as we can see in the images here, we can see that the textiles and the designs and patterns and colors were anything but dull. And so we have very unique patterns and colors that were being used. And again, we're seeing an asymmetrical kind of aesthetic earlier on. And the black on white textile is very common for this early period. And we see the dot in the square motif and these large white circles that are very characteristic of this period. And we can see later on in subsequent slides how elements of these designs and patterns continue on to modern day. So the historic Pueblo weaving period, of course, we have the introduction of wool and sheep by the Spanish. And so the Pueblos, as fiber artists and weavers, were quick to adopt this new fiber, although it was not readily available. It's not like the Pueblo people had free access or free reign to sheep and its wool, because it was, that commodity was very well monitored by the Spanish, because it was such a very valuable trade item. But the native people, the Pueblo people, were kind of seen as a source of manual labor to process this material, because it is very time intensive and requires a certain degree of skill. But in some cases, and especially after around the time and thereafter from the Pueblo Revolt of 1680, the Pueblos did have free access to the sheep and their wool, which they then adopted to weave their own garments, including the ladies' mantas or wool dresses, blankets, and other types of belts and whatnot. So aside from wool, of course, and predating wool was cotton, which came into the Southwest around 700 AD to about 900 AD was like the introduction period that we have cotton introduced from Mexico through indigenous trade. And as the Spanish came up into this area from Mesoamerica, we do have some cases that were documented of the different types of textiles that people were wearing at the time of contact. And much of this cotton was being grown and cultivated in my ancestral lands in the Tiwa Piro province in southern New Mexico, or the Rio Abajo area, the area between Albuquerque, New Mexico and El Paso, Texas, was a whole cultural area of my ancestors that were growing cotton, as well as the Hopi province out in the Hopi mesas in that area were two main cotton production areas at the time and around the time of contact. So we see with the introduction of cotton, we see various non-loom techniques, and as well as loom, backstrap looms, and later the adoption of, or the creation of, the upright loom weaving, which is a characteristic of the Pueblo weaving that is not very common in Mesoamerica. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. And there's evidence of extensive trade existing prior to European contact, but definitely other areas and fibers and textiles being traded after Spanish contact. And again, the Spanish were quick to make use of the labor source through the encomienda system, which was basically legalized slavery at the time of colonization. So cotton fiber preparation was one of the things that I was very interested in, because I know that our ancestors didn't have and were not using cotton cards or wool cards to prepare their fiber. And although there was archaeological evidence to suggest that the Pueblos and the ancestral Pueblos were using wands or switches to beat the cotton, it really wasn't clear to me what that process looked like, or how it was done in order to create a roll egg or something that could be spun from. And it wasn't until I had the opportunity to go down to the state of Oaxaca with a group of archaeologists and other Pueblo weavers for a cultural exchange to look at traditional technology, where this practice actually still survives in various communities throughout Mexico. And this is 100% indigenous technique, pre-contact, that is still being practiced today in various parts of Mexico. And the woman actually in the picture is, I got to meet her in one of our recent trips to Quetzalan in the state of Puebla. And here she is with natural brown cotton on some, looks like cotton sheets, where she's using two rods to beat the cotton and open up the fiber in order to make laps to spin from. So another important part of Pueblo life is corn as at the center of our life. And we were instructed at the time of our emergence and warned that life in this world would be difficult, not easy, that there would be conflict and transformation. But with hard work and dedication and sticking to our spiritual way of life, then we would be blessed with long lives and happy lives, fulfilled lives. So we see this represented in the image from Pottery Mound, where we have 3 young maidens in what appears to be a cornfield. So in essence, we are of the corn and the corn is of us, and that is one of the ways that it is represented. So this is one of the main parallels with Mesoamerica, because we see from the codices, in this case, the Codex Borgia, where the corn is essentially the staff of life or the center of life. In this case, the axis mundi, or the center axis of the world. And at the bottom, we have the cipatli, which is the Nahuatl word for the earth monster or crocodile or caiman. The teeth representing those of the caiman itself, the eagle up at the top of the corn plant, and then the dualities of Quetzalcoatl and Tezcatlipoca, which are essentially in the Mesoamerican cosmovision, the dualities of life that sacrificed of themselves in order to create life in the fifth world. And at the very bottom is Mictlantecutli, or the Lord of the underworld, where everything was thought to originate from. So we see in this image from Cacaxtla that corn and man being, the heads of men coming out of the actual ears of corn, just kind of reinforces and shows that our very intimate connection with corn, and the reptiles in relationship with water. We see water creatures such as starfish and seahorse and eels and different kinds of sea creatures associated with water and moisture. And of course, that connection with corn is also one of the main parallels. So just to give people an idea, and I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but central Mexico is here. We have Mexico City, the state of Puebla. Recently, where much of my work has been happening has been in the state of Hidalgo, which is just northeast of Mexico City. And then a little further east is the state of Veracruz. So up into the north eastern part of Hidalgo, as it crosses over into Veracruz, is kind of the cultural area that I've been working in, primarily with the Nahua speaking cultures of that area, as well as the Tepewa. Those two cultures piqued my interest because there were certain weave structures that are very much endangered. And when I say endangered, that means that there's one or maybe two individuals left practicing them, all of whom are elderly women. And you'll be able to see in the pictures of them later on. So the planting stick is very important for agriculturists in planting of corn. And here we see a codex image of the Lord of the Rain, or Tlaloc. And here we have a common farmer with his koa, or planting stick, in association with the corn. So we have water represented by Tlaloc, his planting stick, and then the corn. So in essence, a lot of indigenous iconography is based on metaphors, and in not only in the Mesoamerican perspective, but in our Pueblo belief and philosophy, we recognize that the act of weaving in and of itself is essentially a parallel action to planting a field and preparing the field for planting, and the process of planting. It's also associated with the serpent. So here we have a serpent coming out of the earth. Again, this reptilian monster, caiman-like creature representing the earth. And then the serpent being an earth creature also. And the corn coming out is also kind of another metaphor. And the calendrical name for corn in the Nahuatl cosmovision is Chicomecoatl, or 7 snake. And so we have the numerical representation of 7 here, and the snake. So 7 snake is the calendrical name for corn, and how it was identified and referred to ceremonially or philosophically. And so in the case of weaving, the baton or the weaving sword becomes very important, because not only is it a very necessary tool to create the weaving and separate the sheds to allow weaving, but it's also reminiscent of the actual planting stick that opens the matrix in the Mother Earth for planting. And so it being of the material of wood is also in keeping with that idea. So the Mesoamerican influence into the Southwest, we see many different influences through trade. Mesoamerica is very well known for the Quetzalcoatl, or the feathered serpent influence or complex that involves very specific kind of indicators, much of which were being traded back and forth, and include the trade of actual live parrots and parrot feathers, multi-story structures with T-shaped doorways, turquoise, salt, pottery, and textiles were a few of the trade goods that were being exchanged between Mesoamerica and the Pueblo Southwest early on. So we do see much influence in that area. And the means of this would have been through the Poxtecayo, or the trades, the traders and trade systems that were established and that traveled these trade routes. And here we see a kiva mural from Pottery Mound depicting a Poxteca, or a trader, that would have been carrying trade goods in her burden basket, water, and even a live macaw. So we see that these individuals were very important in the economic development of this area, and neither Mesoamerica or the Pueblo Southwest existed in a vacuum. These people were interacting, and it was a very rich cultural exchange that was going on that included, everything from material goods to religious beliefs to language to weaving techniques also. So it was a very rich time that was going. People were exchanging ideas back and forth. And so this idea of flowers and being of a flowery world was a very important concept, not only to our Mesoamerican brothers and sisters south of the border, but also in the Pueblo Southwest. Here we have a sample image from Michael Cabote, who was a very renowned, very famous Hopi artist. And this image representing flowers, lightning, offerings, the mounds of cornmeal, both blue and white, representing the different types of clouds, and all of the plant life that surrounds us in our homelands that may serve for the purposes of food, medicine, shelter, and otherwise. But aside from that, all of the flora and fauna, butterflies, insects, all of the seeds, all point into one direction, and that is fertility. And so that was a very important aspect of early life for both the Pueblos and the Mesoamericans. So in this case, we see how the people took this iconography and these metaphors and implemented them into their textiles. And these on the left, we have two examples from Pueblo textiles. At the bottom is Pueblo manta embroidered with wool. And at the top, we have one of my weavings depicting the red flowers at the center of a rain cloud in the middle, representing our planting fields where we plant our crops, and the clouds that come to those fields, and the life that is in keeping with a way of life of who we are as Pueblo people. And on the right, we have a Tepewa woman wearing a characteristic keshkemit, which is like a mantle that Mesoamerican women will wear typically as a top on top of their huipil or blouse. But earlier on, it would have been just the keshkemit, and they would have gone bare-breasted just with the keshkemit. And we do not see the likes of the keshkemit in the Pueblo Southwest. That is one characteristic that has remained uniquely Mesoamerican. But we see the embroidered piece down at the bottom. There's actually another one underneath the ribbon here. So there's two flowers or trees of life that are embroidered on this heavily brocaded keshkemit, which is made from two panels. And I have a diagram that will show that later on, and also a gauze weave. So this keshkemit is actually one of the textiles that it's essentially on its way out. There's maybe one weaver in two villages that I visited and have been able to kind of ask around. But lastly, the last weaver of this in the village of Huehuetla Hidalgo, very elderly. She has dementia. The last time we were there and were able to visit with her, and so I don't believe she's weaving anymore, which is very, very sad. But in the pre-contact weaving, we have that documented in the codices. Here we have an image of Tlazolteotl, and we can actually see that she has a diadem of raw cotton with two spindle whorls as her headdress, and she has earrings of raw cotton. This is the energy of recycling, and also the patroness of midwives and birth and birthing. So she is a very powerful energy that is represented with that creative force, that creative energy of spinning a yarn from raw cotton. And here we have the Codex Mendoza showing a Nawa woman spinning. And I put this image because I wanted people to take note of how the means of spinning, the mode of spinning, where she has a shorter spindle that she puts the end into a little pottery bowl to kind of hold the bottom as she spins, and then spins with her right hand while she holds the fiber source in her left hand and drafts out from the left hand. So keep that image in mind, please, because we're going to see something to connect that a little later on. So here we see the same. These girls are from a village in Guatemala. This one too, this girl is from Nibaj, the village of Nibaj. They speak the Ixil language. And we can see by the age of these young ladies that they began learning the intricacies of the loom from a very early age. It is weaving and spinning is such a natural part of indigenous way of life in this continent, that they start learning from very early on, and many times they're even strapped to the mother's back as she's weaving or carrying out her chores around the house. But it's something that they come in contact with very early on, very shortly after birth, that it just becomes an everyday part of everyday life. So spinning is kind of the first step in creating, after you grow your fibers, then the next step is to prepare your yarn to get that ready. And we have several images here. So right from the middle diagonally, we have Hopi men. Here in the Southwest, it's particularly the men who spin and weave. But I included this image of, on the top left, the Pueblo woman, the Tiwa woman, spinning in a Mesoamerican way, a shorter spindle in a bowl. Okay, that is an anomaly. And I was very excited when I found this image, because it was kind of the missing link to suggest that this technology indeed came from the South, was introduced from the South, and many of the Pueblos actually have oral histories that talk about our connection and relationship with our brothers and sisters to the South. In the top center is one of my teachers. She is Tepewa Doña Epifania. She is Tepewa from the village of Pisaflores in Veracruz. She is the last weaver of the belts in her village. It's a very characteristic belt, which I'll show images of later on. But she's not a grandmother. Well, she has grandchildren, but she's not elderly yet. I don't consider her elderly yet. So she's still young enough, and hopefully she'll be weaving for many, many more years. But she is the last of the weavers in her village. And she learned from her dying grandmother. Her grandmother was bedridden by the time she started. She decided that she was gonna learn the technique, and her grandmother would give her instructions on how to go about preparing the yarn and setting up the loom for the weaving of these belts. And then of course we have the codice image here of the Mesoamerican mode of spinning. You can see that the Pueblos, at least in the Hopi way of spinning, a bowl is not used to put the end in. It's spun off of the knee, as we can see here. And it's done by a little bit longer spindle with kind of an offset whirl closer to the top of the spindle. The backstraps is another not a common way of weaving in the Pueblos, but there are still a few. And obviously, as documented by these photos, we see that it is very well within the memory of some of our Pueblo elders, where individuals would indeed use the backstrap loom to weave, which is a very Mesoamerican means of weaving. And then here we see a Maya weaver on a backstrap loom, kind of the quintessential Mayan woman, again, always female in Mesoamerica, working on the backstrap loom. And then we have the upright looms in the Pueblo Southwest. The wide looms, the advantage, one of the advantages of the upright looms is that they are wider than long, and that allows to create a wide cloth that will cover the whole body. And then the sash that goes on top of that to kind of hold everything together. As we see here, a narrower, again, anchored to the floor and lashed to the ceiling beams. These are some images. These looms came in about 1100, between 1100 and 1300. It's a stationary loom, and they're tensioned by beams. And so it's the same style that was adopted by the Navajo much later, who learned to weave from the Pueblos. So this is, I'll start, looking more closely at some of the different techniques and structures. Here we have a Totonac woman working on a backstrap circular warp. She's working on a complementary band or belt, which is very similar to the type of belts that we now use in the Pueblos, complementary. Her keshkemet, by the way, is very characteristic of that area. It's actually curved weaving, and I'll talk a little bit more about what that is in another slide. And here we have the Hopi brocade weaving of the ceremonial sash. Again, he's sitting on the floor working on the upright loom, so it's no longer backstrap. Here we have the Mesoamerican brocade and a sample of the Pueblo brocade. This woman is working on a curved weaving, which I'll show in a later slide. This is the brocade on a backstrap. Again here, brocade keshkemet in Tepewa. This is one of the last woman that I know of in the state of Hidalgo, in the village of Huehuetla, that still wove these. But sadly, the last time we went to visit her, she was no longer weaving. This bottom image is a piece that I'm working on to kind of understand this process a little more. So you can see I have it lashed to the loom and working on that brocade, first brocade section. Double weave is another structure that we do not see in the Pueblo Southwest, but there are essentially three cultures in Mexico that practice this technique. And basically what double weave is two layers of fabric that are woven simultaneously. So as you can imagine, that would be a very complex setup, a very complex structure, but nonetheless, you can see what can be achieved with the technique once it is mastered. On the bottom left, we have a Huichol woman working on a double weave, double woven sash. As you can see, there are many sticks involved and many heddles in that allows the weaver to manipulate the warps in order to create the double woven fabric. And there's the technique that I've been working on reviving with the last Tepewa weaver in Pisaflores, is this compound weave that was first documented by Ermengarde Johnson, that shows the wide sash. You can see it around her waist here. It's a black sash that's woven like on a cotton tabby. And you can see that there's rhombus or concentric diamond pattern in here. But it's a double, I consider it a double weave because you're working with two wefts, but it's not necessarily creating two layers of fabric. So it's kind of in between a warp-faced weave pattern and a double weave. But it's very unique in the world to the best of my knowledge. I've never seen anything like it anywhere else through my studies or my travels. And so it intrigued me. And I thought it would be very sad if this was lost to time. And so I took urgency and asked my teacher to teach me the technique, which she agreed. And I was able to sit with her for a few days and learn the technique from beginning to end. And I'm in that process now. So this circular warp is also another very important commonality between different loom styles. And basically what a circular warp is a warp that is warped in a circle, in a ring. And so you see that on my loom here, where it goes around and the weaver puts in the heddle and will just keep weaving until you, as far as you want to weave, and then you cut the fringes, and that leaves the fringes for the end of the sash. And so we see that here in the backstrap in this top left image. Also the same with the huichol weaver down at the bottom and this otomi weaver in the middle. It's essentially the same thing, except that the Pueblo loom is on an upright loom and stationary, as opposed to being attached to the weaver themselves. But it's the same basic technology. Another structure that totally blew my mind when I learned about it, when I first learned about it, is the curved weave, or tejido en curva, as they say in Spanish. Basically what that is, as you can see here in this image, where you have your warp will turn at a certain point into weft, and the weaving is then completed. And it looks like the warp is running this way to the left, and then it turns at a certain point, and then that warp turns into weft as it goes across this way. And you can kind of see that a little better on this middle image of the loom. You can see that reaches a certain point where the warps are cut and left free, and then worked across the warps, the white warps, to create this curved pattern here. And so you can see the warps turn here and then turn into weft on this side, creating this curve in the weaving. And so we see there are several villages that do this, but again, this is a technique that is very much in danger of extinction. There is a small kind of revival, and people are taking interest because people are now understanding the importance of the technique, but it is something that is unique only to Mesoamerica that I'm aware of. We do not see this in the Southwest. But these kinds of structures, such as double weave and curved weaving, are unheard of anywhere in the Southwest. And that's kind of adds to my theory as to Mesoamerica being the epicenter of textile technology in the Americas, because it is so complex, it is so refined and fine that it just makes sense in my mind that the fact that these techniques are still alive and documented, and there are still people practicing them, just really excites me. And so I'm trying to do my part to make sure that they don't die out. In this diagram here, we see the keshkemit, or the structure of the keshkemit, which is essentially two panels that are sewn together here. And then this end is sewn to this end on the top to create the this structure of garment. And many times you have this thick red band going all the way around, and then many times it's embroidered with intricate designs as well. Another component is the gauze weave. And so the Tepewa Keshkemit is, we can see, not so much in this image, but we can see different gauze weave technique. It's basically an open technique. Those of you who may be familiar with the Hohokam poncho at the Arizona State Museum, this is a replica I did in natural brown cotton with gauze weave and weft wrap open work. So I replicated that structure in this piece with kind of a Pueblo twist, because I put selvage cords on the top and bottom, on the side selvages and the top and bottom selvage. But another very characteristic technique that we don't really see in the Pueblo Southwest, but it's still alive in Mesoamerica. But we did see this prehistorically. I should correct myself. The gauze weave was present prehistorically in the Pueblo Southwest. Also basket maker period, Hohokam, obviously here. And but then it died off, it went away, and then we don't have anything like that anymore that survived. So that is extinct today. Sprang is another structure that we still see in Mesoamerica. And the only sprang textile that survives in the Southwest is the rain sash, or the the Hopi wedding sash. It's a braided technique. And here we have the rain clouds, or the rain flowers here with representing the clouds and the falling rain. But this is a braiding technique. And here there's a woman from the state of Guerrero working on a sprang piece here. So it's all of these parallels. This is another sprang example, a project that I was involved with. Another piece that's also at the Arizona State Museum currently. We replicated, me and Carol James collaborated to create this replica of the Tonto shirt. So natural dyes, I was so inspired when I started traveling to Mexico, and when I went to Oaxaca, to see all of the natural dyes that were being used and the importance of cochineal. So I was so inspired to see all of the use of cochineal and indigo and the purpura, or the shell dye, that I wanted to create something of my own dyeing. So here, this sash has indigo and 2 shades of cochineal that was achieved by using different mordants, alum and tin, to get the bright red colors and the contrasting anil or indigo yarns. And this is some of my indigo work. At the center, I have a sample of the Tepewa sash that I referenced earlier. Way back was done in indigo on cotton. And in the Pueblo Southwest, indigo was used in the diamond twill portion of the women's mantas. And this is one of the sashes that I did as I was inspired after going to Oaxaca and seeing all the beautiful indigo textiles. I came back and created this piece with 6 shades of natural indigo that I dyed myself. This is some indigo I brought back from Oaxaca, and some of the result of my dye work last summer, I believe. Also, the use of feathers. We see that prehistorically with the turkey feather blankets. Here are some Maya women from the village of Sinacantan in Chiapas, Mexico, integrating feathers into this wedding huipil from their village in Sinacantan. And so lots of imagery is incorporated. Again, we talked about the importance of the serpents or snakes and their connection with corn. Here we see this codex image with corn, ears of corn kind of sprouting from this earth serpent. or the earth came in. In the Mesoamerican cosmology, the Coatlicue, the image of Coatlicue, is kind of seen as the mother of all creation. And here we have two stone representations of her. And we can see how that serpent imagery is maintained in the Pueblo textiles with the diamond twill patterning in the ladies' mantas and in some of the blankets. But that connection with serpents and water and the earth is very important in keeping with that, and also connected to the female or the women. And so Pueblo weaving today, we see lots of continuity, as we have seen, very important in maintaining identity and is a necessity for carrying on our traditions even into modern times. There are lots of adaptations as new materials and tools become available, but the basis of the traditional tools have not changed for over 1,000 years. Many of the textiles mark very important rites of passage from birth, coming of age, into marriage and death. And hopefully with any type of luck, we will continue to see both Mesoamerican and Pueblo weavers carrying on this tradition for many more years to come. And we recognize our textiles as our children, our weavings, metaphors for our children. Here are my two girls, both of which are learning to weave and have become very skilled at the different types of weaving. And so with that, I say hoyu, thank you, and tlasokamati in the Nahuatl language. Thank you very much.